Okay. I want to welcome everybody to the Resident and Family Support Council meeting. And as many of you know, we have these on the second and the fourth Tuesday of every month. And we do these at 3 o'clock. And it's always the same link that can take you to these meetings. So once you get an invite, you can hold on to it and you'll can continue to use that link. You can also always access it through the Ombudsman website page, which is on the, you can just Google Illinois Long-Term Care Ombudsman Program, and then you go to the Resident and Family Support Council page, and you can click right there. As well, at that page, you can also access the YouTube videos of all of our past meetings. So you'll never miss out on any of this great information that gets shared during these meetings. And they really are great meetings because that's what the purpose of this is all about, is to make sure that we empower people with information so you can live that life in a long-term care facility that you need, that you want, and that you deserve. So it's really, really important to us to make sure that we get information about these meetings out to as many people as we possibly can. So any assistance in spreading that word forward, please let me know. You can always email me. I will put my email in the chat in a minute. But you can always email me and I can make sure that either you get added on to the email list, or any friends or families or residents that you know of get added on to the invite list so they get these invites directly. And then also know that we also do put it out the day of the meeting on Facebook, as well as the week before, so that you can always know what the topic is going to be. But if you get on Facebook the day of the meeting, and you can click on the link directly to the meeting from there as well. So we try to make it as user-friendly as we possibly can, so that you have multiple different ways that you can get to access these meetings. So today, I'm really excited. We have Jocelyn Bogdan from the Consumer Voice. She's actually the Senior Program and Policy Manager. Hi, Jocelyn.
Hi.
Jocelyn's going to be talking to us. Next month is Residents' Rights Month.
Yes.
So Jocelyn's actually going to be sharing some information with us. The topic today we have is Residents' Rights Month, celebrating an empowered life in long-term care. And this is so important because it's your rights is what gives you that empowerment to make sure that you can live that life that you really want to be living. Like someone had said to me recently, we don't go to long-term care to die, we go to long-term care to continue living. And these rights is what really helps to make sure that this happens. So Jocelyn, I'll go ahead if you would like. And you want me to put your slides up on the screen?
That would be fabulous. That would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
I'm bad at doing two things at once. So if someone else can advance the slides, then thank you.
I get it. I get it completely. To me, it's a lot easier sometimes to have someone else do it. So I'm trying to get there we go. Can you see it?
I see it.
Okay, great. Okay, so we're good. So Jocelyn, I'm going to pass it off to you. If you want to share a little bit about who you are and what this Consumer Voice is all about, because I don't know if a lot of people know about what this is all about.
That I will do that. So first of all, hi, everyone. I'm Jocelyn Bogdan. I'm the Senior Policy Specialist at Consumer Voice. I've been with Consumer Voice since just before the pandemic. So now that is almost 3 years. I actually started in early November of 2019. And those years, I don't know if it feels like 20 years sometimes and 6 months sometimes. It's just, it's definitely been a whirlwind. And so I'm really excited to talk to everyone today about the rights that residents have and how to advocate for them, and also some of the resources that we have available at Consumer Voice, and then to take any questions that you might have. So next slide. So recently we started formatting all of our PowerPoint presentations a little bit differently. And when I was looking at the new formatting, I discovered that we have this slide, which is fabulous. And I really like it because it talks a little bit about what we do as an organization in a way that is more eloquent than I think I would myself. But Consumer Voice advocates for long-term care consumers and helps long-term care consumers learn how to advocate for themselves. We do this generally at the federal level. We work towards policies that support the quality of life for all long-term care consumers, and then we educate and empower consumers to advocate for themselves. We train and we support groups that advocate for long-term care consumers, and we promote the critical role of direct care workers and the best practices in quality care delivery to ensure that all nursing home residents just receive the care that they deserve. And yeah, I think that's a very great and concise way of explaining what we do. So I was happy to see that slide today. Next slide, please.
Absolutely.
And so, as you just mentioned, this is a conversation about residents' rights, and I thought it was really appropriate to start off by talking for a minute about our Residents' Rights Month, which starts in just a few days. I think it's the 27th today, so October 1st. Residents' Rights Month happens every October, and it's a month where we honor residents living in all forms of long-term care. And it's an opportunity for all of us to really focus on and reinforce our commitment to recognizing the value of each and every resident and the importance of treating every resident with honor and respect. This year's theme, Inspiring Unity Within Our Community, is a chance to really acknowledge the importance of community on many different levels, the communities within the nursing homes, and then the greater communities surrounding the facilities. And I think this theme is really important right now while we slowly come out of the pandemic, hopefully, fingers crossed. While the pandemic caused an enormous amount of social isolation and loneliness for residents, what I think it really did was exacerbate and highlight issues that have always been there. Certainly the social isolation, and I don't mean to in any way undercut it, the social isolation that was experienced in 2020 and 2021 was unprecedented. But a certain degree of isolation has always existed in long-term care, and it shouldn't. We all thrive in communities. Leaning on communities, having access to communities is as important to residents as it is to anyone else. And this ties into resident rights. Next slide. Entering a nursing home, and I feel like I'm echoing what you just said, but echoing a nursing home does not mean that the four walls of your room become your universe. Your nursing home is your home, just like any other home you've ever lived in, and it's part of a larger community. As a nursing home resident, you have the right to be part of your community, to take part in activities, to engage with people, to stay an active member of your community and any community that you choose. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute when we dig into some of our rights, because the reality is that this ties into a lot of really important residents' rights like care planning, self-determination, resident councils. And I really think it's important that we don't think about resident rights in a vacuum, just as something that all residents have, but instead is something that residents have to ensure that they receive the quality person-centered care that they deserve so that they're able to continue living their best lives after they enter a long-term care facility. Next slide, please. But I'm going to back up for a minute. So today we're going to be talking about residents' rights and how to advocate for them. We're going to cover a number of different rights pretty quickly, not nearly all of them, but some that are particularly important. But one right I want to mention right off the bat, because last year when I gave a similar presentation to a different group during Residents' Rights Month, it took probably the most time. And this year I actually pulled it from the presentation for time's sake. But I do want to mention it briefly because it is still important, and that's the right to visitation. So residents really lost this right during the pandemic, and that never should have happened. And thankfully now it has been restored, and residents have the right to see who they want to see when they want to see them. And that should be occurring in all facilities all the time now. And this right, like all rights, lies with the resident. And this is something that was really important to emphasize during the pandemic. It doesn't lie with the visitor. A visitor doesn't have the right to visit the resident unless the resident wants them to visit. But I wanted to mention visitation because for 2 years, it was probably like the most important right that we ever talked about because it had been taken away. Now that it's back, that doesn't mean that it's any less important. So I just want to be really clear, this is still a right and we recognize how important it is. I also want to start off by reminding everyone that these are federal rights that we're discussing today. And federal rights pertain to skilled nursing facilities, which are regulated at the federal level. For assisted living facilities, which are regulated at the state level, you have to look at state rules for your specific rights. And because we have a lot to cover, I want to jump right in. So next slide, please. So one of the most important and overarching rights is that each resident has the right to receive the care and services to obtain his or her highest level of well-being. What does that mean? It means that nursing homes must provide the care, treatment, and services necessary for the resident to receive their own personal highest level of physical, mental, psychosocial well-being, or to maintain their current level of well-being. So what that means is you shouldn't get worse when you enter a nursing home. You should not decline unless there is a medical condition that's progressing or a resident refuses treatment. So for example, if a resident comes into a facility and they are continent and they can walk around on their own, they should maintain that ability unless the decline is unavoidable due to a medical condition. And so this is about individualized, person-centered care for each resident. This isn't a one-size-fits-all thing because everyone is different. And it's about both quality of care and ensuring the highest quality of life possible for every resident. Next slide, please. And so one way to ensure that all residents are receiving the highest level of care is through care planning. And a care plan is a strategy for how staff are going to help ensure the residents' needs are met. Residents have the right to participate in the development and implementation of person-centered plans of care that focus on their individual needs. They have the right to participate in their own assessment and to make decisions about their care, both now and in the future. And residents have the right to request care planning meetings if they feel they need them. And so in practice, this means that residents have the right to make choices about their care, their services, their daily schedule, and their life in the facility, and to be involved in their care planning meeting. That includes their meals, their activities, their therapy, and their personal schedule, in addition to medical, nursing care, and emotional needs. On the medical side, a few things that go along with this are the right to receive adequate and appropriate care, to be informed in all changes of their medical condition, to refuse medication and treatment, and to refuse chemical and physical restraints. And we're going to talk more about chemical restraints in a few minutes. Over the past few years, especially in light of COVID, the need for individualized care has increased, and it is really important that residents and their families assert for this right and ask for care planning conferences when needed. It's a time and place to bring up problems, ask questions, and really ensure that residents are able to live the best life possible in a nursing home. And this ties into our Residents' Rights Month theme because care plans are one of the ways we can ensure person-centered care based on the residents' needs. And there are residents, again, who thrive when they're part of a community, whether they're participating in activities or the facility is helping to ensure transport so they can go to a church service or a community center. If you have a loved one, or if you are someone who isn't getting the stimulation or activity or interaction that you need, you should ask for a care planning meeting to discuss it. All staff should be involved in care planning: nursing assistants, nurses, doctors, social workers, therapists, dietitians, and activity staff. And residents can use these meetings to discuss their interests, the meals they want to eat, and the things they want to participate in. And again, after the past few years, ensuring that residents have the option to participate in these meetings is really crucial. Next slide. So residents also have the right to be free from abuse, neglect, exploitation, and misappropriation of property. And it's the facility's duty to make sure that they remain free from these things. The facility has certain responsibilities. Each facility must have policies and procedures that prohibit and prevent abuse, neglect, misappropriation of resident property, and exploitation. Staff must be screened prior to hiring. Now, most states require background checks. There's no federal background check per se, but you can't hire someone who has a history of abuse, neglect, or exploitation, as evidenced by a guilty finding in court, or a finding entered into the state nurse aid registry, or a disciplinary action in effect against their professional license. Staff must be trained on how to prevent and report abuse. And when abuse is suspected, it must be reported to the proper authorities, and the facility must also investigate internally. They have to do what they can to prevent any further abuse from occurring. The results of any investigation must be reported, and corrective action must be taken if the abuse is verified. With respect to misappropriation of resident property, which includes stealing resident personal funds or their possessions, facilities cannot require residents to sign a waiver saying the facility is not responsible for lost property. That's really important because that's something that I could imagine could be slipped in somewhere. The facility has a duty to exercise reasonable care to protect residents' property from loss or theft, and they can't just say there's nothing we could do about it. And I just want to add in that we're actually going to be talking about resources in a few minutes, but we have a brand new resource coming out in the next few weeks on abuse. It's a consumer resource that we're really excited about, so keep an eye out for it. Next slide. Okay, so the right to be free from chemical restraints. So all residents have the right to be free from physical and chemical restraints. We wanted to emphasize the right to be free from chemical restraints today because while it is always important, it's really taken on increased importance over the past few years. Residents have the right to quality, person-centered, individualized care and the right to make their own choices and treatment decisions. That means residents have the right to say no to medication. And I think that's the most important takeaway. Facilities must always obtain informed, competent, voluntary consent for all treatment. Residents have the right to know the purpose of their treatment, the alternatives to their treatment, and whether the benefits outweigh the risks before they agree to any treatment. We know there are medications, antipsychotic drugs, that are sometimes prescribed not to treat a medical diagnosis, but instead they're given to residents off-label to control the residents' actions or for staff convenience. This is what we consider a chemical restraint, and these drugs pose huge risks, particularly to residents with dementia. And through the pandemic, we know there was an increase in antipsychotic drugs being prescribed, which is very unfortunate, but sadly not terribly surprising. Facilities were very short-staffed. Families weren't able to come in for a very long time to help care for their loved ones or to monitor their treatment. We also know that in addition to prescribing these drugs off-label, an analysis of Medicare data last year found a 70% increase in the number of nursing home residents diagnosed with schizophrenia. 1 in 9 nursing home residents have received this diagnosis, 1 in 9 versus 1 in 150 of the general population. Now, schizophrenia is a condition that's usually diagnosed in your late teens or 20s. You don't develop schizophrenia at 85. That said, if a resident has schizophrenia, it would make sense to be prescribed certain antipsychotic medications. So this is a way for a facility to prescribe medication that is now not off-label, but instead it's for a specific diagnosis. Residents are not suddenly becoming schizophrenic when they enter facilities, or they didn't become schizophrenic when their facilities locked down in 2020. I think the number of residents who somehow developed schizophrenia in April and May and June of 2020 was around 7,000. So facilities were falsely diagnosing residents with schizophrenia to continue using these medications. And we've heard from family members who only hear afterwards that their loved ones' medications have changed, that they've been put on new medications that they weren't aware of. And so if you have a family member or a loved one who is struggling and a facility has come to you wanting to prescribe an off-label medication or telling you something about your loved one that you don't really trust or believe, there are questions you can ask and suggestions you should raise. So you can ask, if they're prescribing a new medication, why was the drug ordered and what prompted it? You can ask what else could be causing these symptoms. I recently talked to someone who realized that there was sort of a domino effect with her mom. She was prescribed one medication for something, and then she didn't realize at the time, but the side effects of that medication then led to her being prescribed another medication and then another medication until she was very heavily medicated. And this woman had to fight very hard to get her mom off of these drugs. You should ask about non-drug options. If they list behavioral symptoms as a reason for the medication, you should emphasize that the facility needs to identify and address the cause of your loved one's behavioral symptoms. They might be hungry. They might be angry about something. They might be cold. They might be in pain. There very often are environmental factors that could be impacting someone. Could be the light. It could be the noise. Maybe it's too quiet for someone who's always lived in a city, or maybe it's too loud for somebody who's used to peace and quiet. There could be smells. There's so many different reasons why a resident might be distressed. And there's so many ways to address that distress that don't include medications. You can ask for alternatives. You can ask whether or not the drug has a black box warning. You can ask what the side effects might be, and if they believe that the benefits for the drug do outweigh the risks. And also, and this is very important, you should ask what the plan is for monitoring the use of the medication and for weaning your loved one off of it, because residents have rights around all of this. You can and should ask questions. No one should ever be given medication without their informed consent, and everyone has the right to the person-centered care that they deserve. And I just want to take a second to mention that Consumer Voice actually has a lot of resources surrounding this issue. We've been part of a campaign over the past couple of years in partnership with the AARP Foundation, Avoiding Drugs as Chemical Restraints. You can visit our website. I'll show you a little bit about our website in a few minutes for resources on this issue. We have a pocket guide that actually lists many of the questions that I raised a moment ago on one side, and then if you flip it over, it lists the name of many of the drugs that you should be aware of on the other side. We have fact sheets. We also have a podcast series called Pursuing Quality Long-Term Care, where we dig into different aspects of what quality care is and how to achieve it. And I will come back to resources in a few minutes. Next slide. So residents have the right to voice grievances without retaliation or fear of retaliation, and they have the right to prompt efforts to resolve their grievances. And so this is an internal process within a facility. Residents could have concerns about a number of issues: the timeliness of their care, how they're being treated, the food and care they're supposed to get but aren't, and more. The right to follow grievances with the facility without retaliation or even the fear of retaliation exists, and the facility must work to resolve those complaints promptly. Each facility needs to have a grievance policy that explains the process for looking into and resolving complaints, and that policy must be provided to residents upon request. They have the right to file grievances in writing, orally, or anonymously. And there needs to be a specific staff person who's responsible for handling complaints. Residents must be given contact information for the designated staff person or the grievance official that includes their name, their business address, mailing and email, and their business phone number. The grievance official oversees everything related to the complaint from start to finish. So they receive it, they track it, they investigate it, they make sure information is kept confidential, and they finally provide a written decision to the resident. And residents must be told how long the process will take. I think the regulations refer kind of questionable phases, prompt efforts to resolve complaints in a reasonable time frame, but they do need to be resolved reasonably, and residents need to be given an idea of what that time frame looks like. At the conclusion of the investigation, the resident must be given a written decision regarding his or her grievance. Information must be provided in the decision, including what was done to investigate the complaint, the findings, whether the complaint was confirmed, and whether any action the facility has taken or will take, what action the facility is going to take to resolve the complaint. Next slide. This one, I think most people on this call are pretty well aware of the long-term care ombudsman program, but I think it's always really important to emphasize it again and just mention a couple things. So residents always have the right to access their long-term care ombudsman program. And again, this was something that was really important in the height of the pandemic because it was really hard for people and people didn't maybe know how to reach out. But this is something that residents always have the right to make a phone call and, during that time Zoom with, but now see in person their ombudsman and work with their ombudsman. So every state's required to have an ombudsman program under the Federal Older Americans Act. The ombudsman, as many of you know, I'm sure, maybe all of you know, are big advocates for residents. They provide support, they help address concerns. At Consumer Voice, whenever a resident or a family member calls us, one of the first things we do if they have an issue specific to their facility is try to connect them to their own ombudsman to help them advocate. And something important to note that I think is really important for residents to be aware of, and I think this is a great aspect of the ombudsman program, is that ombudsmen work from the resident's perspective. When they receive a complaint, they ask the resident what it is they want to see happen. And this is true even when the ombudsman receives the complaint from someone else. So if a staff member turns to the ombudsman's job is still to resolve that complaint to the resident's satisfaction, even when what the resident wants might be different than what the staff member who voiced the complaint wants. When I talk to family members or residents, I really emphasize that your long-term care ombudsman program is your best advocate. They can work with you directly to make changes at your facility. And the other thing to be aware of, and again, I think everyone here knows this because of the nature of the activity we're currently participating in, but long-term care ombudsmen are a great source of information and resources. They can help with resident and family council development. They can come in and run trainings. They're just a great resource. And we're going to talk more about resident councils and family councils in a minute. Residents and families can also file complaints with their state survey agency. So if a resident is being denied their rights, they can and should file a complaint to their state survey agency, who then investigates that complaint. So if rights are being violated, that's something we tell everyone to do. Sometimes people don't want to do it. They're worried about retaliation. You can do this anonymously. Your ombudsman program can help you, but it's really important to put your complaint in writing if your rights are being violated. And so to find the contact for all of that, you can go to theconsumervoice.org/gethelp on our website, and I will show you where that is in a few minutes. And you'll be able to find state-specific information. Next slide, please. The right to transfer and discharge protections. So far too often, residents are told they have to leave their facility. They aren't given any notice and they aren't told they have any rights. Residents have a number of rights related to transfer discharge, and the facility has responsibilities they must meet before transferring or discharging a resident out of a nursing home. So once a resident is admitted, they have the right to remain in that facility and not be transferred or discharged. There are only 6 permissible reasons a facility can discharge a resident against their wishes. And those are: the facility can't meet the resident's needs, the resident has improved and no longer needs nursing home care, the resident is endangering the safety of others, the resident is endangering the health of others, non-payment, and when the facility is closing. And so there's procedural protections for the resident before discharge or transfer. There needs to be advance written notice, usually 30 days prior to the date of the proposed discharge or transfer. And there's the right to appeal the proposed discharge in front of an administrative law judge. So a common reason for discharge is that the facility says they're unable to meet the needs of the resident. This happens all the time. This happened with my own grandmother. If attempting to transfer or discharge a resident for this reason, the nursing home has to document what needs the facility had, what needs the resident has that the facility cannot meet, what the facility has done to attempt to meet those needs, and what services the receiving location offers that will meet that need. So it isn't as simple, and I think a lot of people aren't aware that's necessary, but it isn't as simple as just saying, we can't meet your needs, you need to leave. There needs to be documentation and an explanation of what they can't do and what another facility can do better than them. And residents also have rights with respect to transfers or moves within the nursing home itself. So for instance, a resident can refuse to be moved to another room within the facility if that transfer is solely for the convenience of staff. So a resident might experience a change in condition that requires additional care. And the facility staff might want to move the resident to another room with other residents who require a similar level of services, because it's easier for the staff to care for residents who require the same needs. The resident would still have the right to stay in his or her room and refuse that transfer. You can't force someone to transfer just because it makes life for the staff more convenient. Next slide. So the right to self-determination. The ability to make choices and to have control over our lives is extremely important to all of us, and it is no less important to nursing home residents. Former nursing home residents who've moved out of facilities and moved back into the community, the one thing that they all say is that they're so glad to not have to live every minute on the facility schedule anymore, that they have freedom and control over their days. And that is not how it is supposed to be. That is not how nursing homes are supposed to work. They're actually very good and strong residents' rights about being able to choose what your life looks like. Unfortunately, we don't always see these implemented, but residents have rights that pertain to self-determination and to choice. They have the right to choose activities, schedules, healthcare, and providers consistent with their interests, assessments, and plan of care. And this means that the resident should be able to live their lives as much as possible as they did before entering the nursing home. So for instance, if you have a resident who likes to sleep until mid-morning and then they like to go outside for a walk in the middle of the afternoon and then come in and have a cup of tea and visit with other people, the facility should be doing whatever it can to make that happen for that resident. And so why is that important? We're all different. We all have different routines. That doesn't go away when you enter a nursing home. When you're visiting others or in a situation where your routine is interrupted after a few days, you really start missing being on your own schedule. And we have to always keep in mind what I said at the beginning. This is the resident's home. This is the place where they should feel the most comfortable and the most supported. Residents have the right to choose aspects of life in the facility that are significant to them. They have the right to receive reasonable accommodations of needs and preferences in residing and receiving services in the nursing home. So when you take these rights together, the intent is that instead of life in the facility being organized and operated around the facility's schedule and what works best for the facility, it should be the other way around. It's not the resident that needs to adapt to the facility. The facility should be adapting to each resident. Residents also have the right to interact with members of the community. And this takes us back to our Residents' Rights Month theme. They have the right to participate in community activities, both inside and outside of the facility. They have the right to participate in social and religious community activities. These are rights that are about the facility supporting and accommodating as much as possible the resident's needs and choices for how he or she chooses to spend their time. For instance, if a resident indicates that attendance at a family gathering or a community event is important to them, the facility should be doing whatever it can to help the resident attend these events, to organize transportation. They should be doing whatever they can to the greatest extent possible. The resident should be able to live their life as much as possible the way they have always lived it and continue to spend their days doing the things that they enjoy and things that are important to them. And so up until the time of the pandemic, it was looking like there was really some progress towards making these rights a reality in nursing homes, but far too many facilities are still institutionalized, routine, and organized around the ease and convenience of staff. And that is a problem. Next slide, please. And so the right to organize and participate in resident, and I'm going to talk a little bit about family councils as well because of the audience. Residents have the right to form and participate in a resident group or a council, and to have their family members participate in a family council or a family group. And these groups often come together to share information, have educational programming, and importantly, to discuss and work to find solutions for problems or concerns that residents and families may raise. Raising concerns in a council meeting can help you, a resident or a family member, determine whether there are others who might be dealing with the same issue. And it can also help you not feel alone. These also help support community. The collective voice of the council can be helpful in getting a resolution to problems that are more widespread. It's often if food is a problem in the facility, it can be really difficult if one person, and I know a resident in a facility in New York who is constantly sending emails about the food that she's receiving. It's easier when you have a critical mass complaining about the same thing than one person trying to advocate on their own. And so the nursing home has to do a few things to help facilitate these groups. They have to provide a private space for the council to meet, and they have to assign a staff person approved by the facility and the council to assist the council and respond to written requests. And the council has the right to control and manage the meetings, and staff and visitors can only attend with permission from the group. The facility is required to make residents and families aware of upcoming meetings, and the facility must also act promptly upon grievances and recommendations of the councils, including concerning proposed policy and operational decisions affecting resident care and life in the facility. The requirement to act upon grievances and recommendations does not necessarily mean that the facility has to carry out all of the council's requests, but it does need to show and justify its actions or inactions based on those requests. Next slide. I feel like I just zipped through a lot of rights really quickly, but those are some of the rights, just some of them, that all nursing home residents are entitled to. But what happens when there is a problem? What if the facility isn't letting you do the things you want to do? What if you're denied a care planning meeting? Or if you, as a family member, realize your loved one has been prescribed a new medication without their consent, they're not allowed to attend a religious service that's important to them. Just because the rights are there does not mean that they're always honored. And this is important because, and I'm going to talk about this quite a bit in the next minute or two, the staff might not always understand your rights. They might not be as aware of your rights as you are. Next slide. So the first thing you should always do is try to work with your facility. And I know that's not always possible, but it is always better to have a friendly relationship with the facility versus an adversarial one. And I've actually spoken to a lot of residents about this. You just get further if the facility doesn't view you as oppositional. It doesn't mean you don't make requests. It doesn't mean you don't voice your grievances, but you can try to do it in a way that is friendly and not really as detrimental. And some of the residents that I speak to pretty regularly really emphasize this. And they say, don't back down, don't not stand up and ask for what you need, but don't do it in a way that feels openly defiant. So it takes a little bit of nuance. And you know, sometimes facilities just don't know that they're wrong. Like I just said, they honestly might not have the same level of education that you do on what your rights are. Sometimes they're going to need resources and education. And we're going to come back to this in a minute and talk a little bit about resources and where to find things. But again, talk to the staff, do this in a non-adversarial way. We know how short-staffed facilities are. We're unfortunately aware of the very high turnover rates that so many facilities have, and it really is just possible that they don't know anything about residents' rights. So start by going to the staff who provide care. Ongoing open communication can help keep minor problems from becoming serious and can help build a good working relationship with staff. But you can also go to the director of nursing or the administrator if talking to the staff doesn't resolve the problem. And of course, as we talked about earlier, you can always file a complaint through the nursing home's grievance process. And we also strongly recommend that you connect with the resident and family councils that we just talked about. If you or your loved one is experiencing issues, chances are you're not alone and there's power in numbers. So work with your council to see if this is an issue you can resolve together. And actually, residents' rights is a great topic for the resident and family council to ensure that they're educated on. Other residents or family members might not know as much as you do. And this is a great opportunity to bring in an ombudsman to help educate members of the council so that you are all on the same page. Next slide. So, of course, sometimes that's not going to work, and you're going to have to seek help from outside of the nursing home. And so this is where the long-term care ombudsman program becomes really important. They're really your first point of contact outside of the facility. So reach out to them to see if they can help you advocate and educate the facility on your rights. And then you take it to the next level. You can file that complaint with your state licensing agency, and your ombudsman can help you with this. These things take time. I've talked to a lot of family members who are waiting after filing a complaint. They just don't know where it stands, what's going on. You don't have to stop there. You can do other things. You can reach out to your local elected representatives. Nursing home residents are constituents, just like everybody else. And that's what your representatives are there for. So never feel like it's the wrong move to make a phone call if you're not getting the care and your rights aren't being honored. You can also write a letter to your local paper about what's going on, or you can use social media. You can tweet at the nursing home or at the corporation who owns it, or again, at your local representatives. Do what you need to do to get the attention that you deserve. And remember, that one phone call very often is not enough. I speak with family members pretty often who, when I asked if they've reached out to their ombudsman office, they'll say, oh yeah, I called and left a message and I never heard back. Well, then you need to call again. You have to keep at it. You have to be the squeaky wheel. Advocacy is work, and it can be hard and it can feel frustrating. I know on a personal level, dealing with personal issues, I have reached out to my city council person in Washington, D.C. many times, only to not hear back or to receive a form letter back. You have to keep emailing and calling. That's just how it works. You have to be the person who makes noise. Next slide. Resources. So I want to spend a few minutes making sure you have the resources you need once this webinar is over. And I'm not going to hit on nearly the resources that we have available, but I'm going to go over a couple of things really quickly. Next slide. This is my very sad attempt at a screenshot. This is what our website looks like. And I wanted to start off by directing everyone to our website. We have a lot of resources available for everyone on the site, which you can find at www.theconsumervoice.org. And remember the, because people forget that and then they don't get there. So it's theconsumervoice.org. We have information for a variety of different audiences. You can see on the next to where it says the National Consumer Voice specialized information, we have information for long-term care consumers themselves, for family members, for advocates. And we have our Get Help link at the very top. You can see along the top next to Home and About. That Get Help link, which I mentioned before, takes you to a map of the country. You can click on your state or the state that your loved one might be in to find state-specific information on your long-term care ombudsman programs and other state resources, including your state licensing agency. We also have our latest news and updates. We have a section on policy and advocacy, which includes our policy priorities and the issues that we work on. Often our policy pages have different consumer resources linked. So for instance, if you click on policy and advocacy at the top of the page, I'm like pointing to it on my screen, and then go to policy issues and choose transfer discharge, you'll find specific fact sheets on those issues that you can use. If we have time, I can try at the end of this meeting. I don't know if we're going to have time, but if we have time, I can try to guide you through the website if you want. So we'll see if we get to that or not. But actually, I'm really glad that the slide that was open when I took the screenshot was on our annual conference, because I actually want to talk about that for a minute to everyone. So next slide, please. So our 2022 annual conference is back in person. It is November 14th through 16th in Baltimore. And this year, we're also going to have a virtual component. So while we would love for everyone to join us in person, And the past 2 years really have illustrated that for some people, a virtual conference was a great option. So we wanted to make sure that option is still out there for everyone. Being together in person is great, but sometimes with travel and all of these things, it's just easier to attend a virtual conference. So the virtual conference, the virtual component, is from December 8th through 9th. So about less than a month after the in-person conference. And our theme is shaping the future, which I'm really excited about. I think after the last few years, it feels really empowering to be in a place where hopefully we can work to make really positive change for residents of long-term care. And I really urge anyone who can to consider the conference. If you can attend in person, the virtual conference is included. I know for many family members specifically, though, the virtual conference has made it possible to join over the past few years. So if the in-person conference is too much of a commitment or too much money or too much travel, definitely think about attending our virtual conference. There's going to be a lot of great content and a lot of really great speakers, and I am really excited about it. Next slide. So we actually have a lot of content on our webpage about residents' rights, and I just wanted to make sure that I at least included this fact sheet. Next slide. Which, as you can see, has been translated into more than 10, I think 13, I counted earlier today, different languages. And this is something that's useful for residents and families who speak different languages. It is also useful for staff. Remember, we were just talking about how often you may know more than staff does about resident rights, and it's really not anyone's fault, but most CNAs are learning how to care for residents. They're learning how to handle equipment. They're learning a lot of different things. They are not focused on residents' rights. And so this fact sheet, and especially having it in different languages, because sometimes CNAs speak different languages, is a really great resource to help educate others on residents' rights. Next slide. I also wanted to include a shout out to my personal directions for quality living. This is a form that residents can use to record their personal preferences and information about themselves to help ensure that their long-term care providers know about their wants and interests. This can help with care planning and help to ensure that all residents are receiving the person-centered care that they deserve. Next slide, please. And so, this is kind of a personal plug, but another way for residents to educate others is by joining our Consumer Advisory Council. Our council is made up of residents throughout the country who meet regularly to discuss issues with our staff. And I think it's honestly one of the most important things that we do at Consumer Voice, because we cannot properly advocate for residents if we don't know what the residents are experiencing or what they need us to be advocating for. So we have meetings every 2 months that are staff-led. So we come in with an agenda, certain topics, we ask questions, residents discuss them with us. We've also recently started having meetings that are resident-led, that serve a bit of a different purpose with our resident council, with our Consumer Advisory Council, sorry. They let residents who are advocates in their own facilities spend time talking to each other about issues. Usually a staff member is on this call, but we stay off camera and we're muted, and we're on the call with the resident's consent and permission so that we can be alerted to any issues that might come up that we aren't already aware of. But these calls are completely resident led. And back to our theme for October. Oh, I started echoing. Building and finding unity and community. It can be hard when you're a resident in your facility with no one to talk to about the work that you're doing. These meetings give residents the chance to connect with each other and to really bounce ideas off of each other. So our last call was 2 weeks ago, and we had a resident in Maryland talking to a resident in Texas and another resident in, I think, one of the Dakotas, about voting and what's going on in their facility around voting and problems that they've had about voting. And all of the residents were just talking to each other about their own experiences. And so not only is this beneficial in terms of us being aware of what's happening and what's going wrong, but it also gives the residents an opportunity to hear what other residents are doing to resolve and work on issues. And so in addition to those meetings, we also rely on our Consumer Advisory Council to have residents find residents who are willing to speak to Congress. We've had residents sit in on meetings with the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services. We really rely on the Consumer Advisory Council when we're looking for residents to speak out, when we're looking for residents to submit comments on things. It's an opportunity to connect and to do a lot of really positive work towards change. So if you or someone you know is interested in engaging with us, please send me an email at jbogdan@theconsumervoice.org. We are always looking for more residents to join. And it's just, as we've grown the council, it's just been a really positive experience for everyone. Next slide. And so I also just wanted to make sure I shared links where you can become a member of Consumer Voice and join our action network, so that you can participate in our advocacy, whether it's writing a letter to Congress or making a phone call or taking part in our social media storms. We really rely on our network to help us get the attention that we need on these issues. So you can see the links there for both becoming a member and joining our action network. Next slide. And I will end finally after what looks like 47 minutes. So I'm sorry I spoke for so long, but I think someone else talked in the beginning, so it's okay. By giving you all of the different ways that you can connect with us. First, you see our website again, theconsumervoice.org. You can email us at info@theconsumervoice.org, and your email will be answered. You can also friend us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And I really urge you to do this. This is another way you can see the advocacy work that we're doing and become a part of ensuring that long-term care consumers live the best lives that they deserve to be living. And so with that, I will stop talking.
Sorry, I needed to unmute myself. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. That was really some great information. And I know we did have some questions in the chat, but if anybody has a question that they would like to unmute themselves with, please do feel free to do that. We more than want to take those questions. While people are figuring out if they have a question or figuring out how to unmute themselves, there's a question in the chat that says, my sister presents concerns in a respectful manner and offers solutions. Staff recently told her, if you don't like it here, move somewhere else. And you are a drama queen. We are doing the best we can. How would you respond to that?
I mean, that is hard. And that does happen, and I think that in that case, I would definitely go above the staff to the administrator of the nursing home, or I would talk to someone else. I don't in any way want to minimize that. And like I said, there's a resident I know very well who lives in New York who has been fighting to have better food. I was actually on a call with her once. She's part of our Consumer Advisory Council, and we were having a conversation. And her food came 2 hours after she ordered it, and it was not the food that she wanted. It looked terrible. She held it up to show us on the call, and she has really tried to work with the staff and to, try to maintain that relationship, but it has failed. And that does happen sometimes. And there is always the fear of being labeled the problem. And I know that scares a lot of residents and family members away from doing things, but I think based on the issues that this person's sister is having, this is an opportunity to one, raise it above the staff, talk to the administrator of nursing, but also reach out to the ombudsman. And if your rights are being violated, file a complaint. And you can do this with the state survey agency anonymously so that they don't know that it's you. They might try to figure out that it's you, but it's still worth doing. I think sometimes working with the staff just doesn't work. And so you have to go above them and you have to find other ways to advocate. I also would try to find out if in that facility there is the resident or family council, because again, it might not just be this one person who is having this experience. There might be other people. And so there might be ways to engage together to do something to try to help. And I know that can sound insufficient because it's terrible to be in your own home, your facility, being spoken to that way. But I think you do. Sorry, go ahead.
I do think that that's a piece of it. Sometimes I feel like people don't know what they don't know. I mean, I'm an
yes.
And sometimes I feel like the staff, they work there. And they're thinking this is a work environment, and at work, we all want to get along at work, and you just get through the day and you do your job that you need to do. And they forget that this is not work. This is home. This is somebody's home. So if I'm being a drama queen, it's because this is my life. I wake up here every day and I go to bed here every day, and this is my world. And so because of that, I have the ability to be able to speak up and say something just as you do at home. And I think staff need that reminder. And I liked the approach that you said when you said, you don't have to be nasty about it. Because people do listen better when they're, people don't like to listen when they're being yelled at. But to say, do you understand that this is my world? This is my home. Do you have things that go on in your own home? And do you speak up about that you don't like? I need to speak up about this stuff. And if we listen to each other, then I won't be complaining anymore. This
I
is
think
my
that's a really good point. And one thing I was going to say earlier, and then it slipped out of my mind as I was talking, is, and again, it's very difficult when this is your home to give the staff grace, but most of the residents that I've spoken to over the past 2 years through the pandemic have spoken about the staff not as their enemies, not as people who are out there working against them, but as people who are hugely overworked and who, and again, many of the residents I work with are, higher level functioning. They have the ability to really see the situation for what it has been. They understand that their staff is being overworked and being underpaid, and that there are these high turnover rates and people come in poorly trained and don't know what they're doing and are just trying to get through the day and do their job. You're right. I mean, it is sometimes really important to take a step back and sort of see where the other person is coming from. And again, that does not in any way condone being spoken to or treated the way that you're treated in that situation. But it is important to kind of understand, again, they might not know what they're doing wrong. They might not understand. And that is a very important component of that.
And I do think too, it's with that, then because I've heard the same thing that you've heard. I've had residents say to me, when I'll say, did you bring this up to anybody? The food is cold, and I'll say, did you bring this up to anybody? You know what? They're working so hard around here. I don't want to be a pain in their neck, and it's okay. I'll put up with the cold food. But again, you have to remember that you do have that right to have
right
food.
Absolutely.
Cold food is cold food. Warm food should be warm food. It tastes very different when warm food is supposed to be cold, it doesn't taste the same. So I think don't also use that as an excuse not to speak up because you feel like people are being overworked. Remember, this is your home. And if you don't speak up, people have no opportunity to change.
Yeah. And, it's funny, it's important to look at the staffing from the resident's perspective. I work with one resident. I did a podcast several months ago, probably now, again, time is funny. It might've been in like February or March, around staffing with several residents. And one of them just really beautifully and eloquently articulated what her day looks like when there is enough staff and when there isn't enough staff. And she is someone who does advocate for herself, but she said, there are a lot of things that happen if the people who do the laundry don't come in. They don't have towels. There are no showers. That isn't because the CNAs don't want to give them showers. It's because other people didn't come to work and they don't have towels. That doesn't make it okay. That doesn't mean she's not going to push for it. But it's, I think looking at all of that from the perspective, okay, like if there is enough staff, if the morning shift comes in and people get out of bed and they have breakfast when they're supposed to, versus if they don't come in, if the night staff doesn't come in and residents aren't taken back to bed and they're sitting in pain for too long, people might start saying, oh, this resident, again, we come back to when chemical restraints are prescribed, they're being ornery, they're being difficult, they're being a problem, they're in distress, they're in pain. They've been sitting for 8 hours because there isn't anyone there to relieve them. So it really, it's one of those things where it's easy to say from the outside, but you do have to look at it from a variety of perspectives and see how these things are impacting everyone.
Yes. And someone did ask for a copy of your presentation, which will be put onto the Illinois Ombudsman website. So know that always I connect it with the description of the program and also the connection to be able to see it as well. So you will be able to get copies of these slides. Mary had her hand up. I don't know if Mary's still here. I was just looking for her. And I don't see if she is still on the call or not. Mary, you had your hand up. Did you have a question you wanted to ask?
Sorry, I had to take myself off mute. Yeah, I'm wondering, that I was thrilled to hear about this meeting. I just wonder, we're not really addressing one of the main reasons that people don't report things. And that's retribution.
Yeah, retaliation.
For that, yeah.
Yeah. The things I would say, I know that is true. And I know, again, there are some residents we work with who have been able to sort of walk a line where they're not as worried. I was actually talking to one resident recently who does speak up. Again, and I think some of this goes into what you were just saying about, talking about things in a way that aren't adversarial and angry, but like, these are my rights. These are the things I deserve and I should be having. And sometimes I think that's even harder for family members because when you're a family member doing this, you're talking about something your loved one, they're not getting the food they need, or they're not getting the care that they need. It can be very difficult to take that step back and to try to present things in a way that is calm and I don't want to say rational, because I think it might be rational to be more angry about things, but in a way that is combative, but I also think, again, this is, if you're worried about retaliation and there is a problem, that's a place where if you're a resident council can be helpful, because if it's an entire facility, if it's several residents, if it's 10 residents complaining about the same thing, that might have a very different impact than if it is one or two people who get labeled a problem in the facility. And I think that working with others in that situation might be a good way to do it, but it is hard. I mean, and that is the reason why sometimes, you can file complaints anonymously, because people are afraid. Family members are afraid, residents are afraid, and it's a terrible thing. But I think you kind of need to gauge the situation and, how you deal with it. I mean, specifically, and I see that there's a comment, retaliation is not allowed, but there is passive aggressive retaliation. It's true. I mean, when you file a grievance, the regs specifically say, like, you need to be able to do this without the fear of retaliation. It does exist. And of course, there are going to be ways that a facility can make your life more difficult. But I do think that is a time, if you don't have a resident council, it might be a good time to try to start one, or a family council, to try to bring some of these issues that you're dealing with to bear in a larger group.
And include that ombudsman in if you're feeling that retaliation piece, because they can also really help monitor that and ensure that because they can see, they can be that additional witness if there's that person that's feeling retaliated against. But I do want people to I think sometimes when you ask people questions, when you're looking, like, say, well, what would you do if it was me? If my food is cold, let's just say, for example, and a staff member is, giving you gruff about it, I would be like, so do you think it's really fair for somebody? Do you eat food cold? What would you do if you were me living in this facility right now? Would you speak up about something that was bothering you? And, put it to them to get them again, because I do feel people entered into this path. And again, it's because I'm an optimist. But I can't think that people will be purposely want to give people cold food, purposely want to give people cold showers, purposely want to do this stuff. You don't know it. And maybe there are people out there that do that, but I won't be able to get a temperature for what's happening if I don't speak up and say something, because then I can say, well, then you know what? You shouldn't be working in a facility like this. You should not be working in a home where other people live if you're not going to listen to what they want. I mean, I think that's really important stuff.
Lee, this is Teresa Coleman. I'm a regional ombudsman in the Peoria area, and I know I'm watching the clock, so I'll make this quick. But if anybody has a complaint and they're afraid of retaliation and they're wanting it to be anonymous, they can talk to their ombudsman, who can possibly, in their investigation, start it out to see if it's a systemic issue. That way, nobody's name is identified during that systemic investigation. And if they take those findings to the administrator and talk about how there's an atmosphere of retaliation or bullying, and talk to the administrator about where it's coming from, which wing it might be in, or which shift during the week, the ombudsman can also offer to that administrator to do sensitivity training for the staff, so that there can be these light bulb moments that show them, if you do something bad, doesn't make you a bad person. It means that good people do bad things sometimes too. So not go in with the fire and brimstone of, you're so bad because you did this, but let's all talk about how we get task oriented. You get up in the morning, you let the dog out, you come back in to put the food in the dish, and then you get the dog back in and feed the dog, put it back out again, get the backpacks, get the lunch, where's your shoe, get in the car. And so you're in that mindset. Sometimes you get to the facility and then you get a little rough. Well, so you're not a bad person. So let's look at our behaviors and how we need to just understand the sensitivity of what our job is when we're working in a facility. If it's a
Mhm.
systemic issue, it can be handled by the ombudsman sometimes and taken care of. And that person who brought it to them, first of all, can be told that they're part of the solution to a problem that was taking place and involving so many other people. And that feeling of empowerment can really help them for any future issues that they have.
Yes, absolutely,
Sorry,
absolutely. Thank you for that, Teresa. That was
sorry for talking
important.
fast. I
Yeah.
couldn't say my hand, putting my hand up. There, so sorry.
No, thank you. I'm glad you said that. And Clark, I'll get you in 1 minute. Oh, actually, this was your question regarding the law enforcement. Did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
I think you can ask that, please. I have another question I can ask.
Okay, so you were asking about enforcement power, if any, does National Consumer Voice for Quality Long-Term Care have by itself? And what other enforcement organizations do you see as being efficient? And what if specific state agencies are not effective? So these are some questions. Any other, so as Consumer Voice, let's start with that one. Do you guys have any, what enforcement power, if any, do you guys have?
We are not an organization that has enforcement power. And I actually, unfortunately, am going to have to jump off the call in a minute to take my daughter to her swimming class.
Oh, yes.
But we don't have any enforcement powers. I mean, again, we are an organization that works to empower and educate people. What I would suggest that you do is, if you're looking, you can visit our website, and I am actually, let me see if I can actually do this real quick. No, hold on. I'm sorry. I'm very bad at, maybe this is it. Are you guys seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Which screen are you seeing? All of them or just?
No, we're just seeing the Consumer Voice reports reveals how inadequate staffing affects residents.
That is not, wait, this screen, do you see my?
Registration is open for the.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
So, okay. All right. Thank you. Sorry about that. So this is our Get Help page. And it says find your long-term care ombudsman program near you, but you can actually find a lot of different organizations on your state pages, or at least on some of the state pages. So in addition to ombudsman programs and watch, okay, well, here there's only a citizen advocacy group. But in different states, there are different organizations that you can look for to help. And no, now I'm disappointed that didn't work better. I'm just going to click on another state as example to see if there's one. No, New Jersey is a terrible state for this. Okay, well, I'm not proving my point at all. I'm going to try Texas. Let's see. Unless we've changed these pages recently. Yeah, it looks like we used to have more than just advocacy groups, but we had, let me see if any of them still have them. That looks like we've pulled everything and we just have citizen advocacy groups on these pages. Or actually, hold on a second. Let me go back to that because it looks like we had a little bit more. No. I guess, just reach out to the local ombudsman program and ask them who they recommend. I mean, and at the bottom of this page, it actually has like the State Unit on Aging, Adult Protective Services, Protection and Advocacy Organizations. We used to have all of these on the individual state pages. So this is actually what I was looking for. I'm sorry about that. Offices of the Attorney General, Medicare Fraud and Control Units, state health departments, and state Medicaid agencies. So that is where I would direct you. And you can find all of that actually now on the major Get Help page. So apologies for that. That is not where I thought it was. So I should not have started screen sharing before I looked a little bit closer. But in terms of enforcement agencies, I'll stop the share now. That's where I would go to find that.
And we also have that on our page. And I know Teresa, who did have to leave because she had to jump off to get to something else too. She put in a bunch of resources, had the contact information for your ombudsman, the YouTube channel information, and the Facebook page channel information as well. It is 4:05, and Jocelyn, we thank you so much for joining us today.
Sure, this is great.
I'm going to stop the recording, but we always stay on for anybody who wants to stay on. And there are some things in the chat that I will continue to address. So we can go to swim lessons, Jocelyn. We know that's very important.
It's 5:05 here. I am an hour different, so it's a little bit later. But all right.